Hi guys, welcome back. Another security stories for you, and this one has been requested a few times. The craziest security guys that I work with, the craziest doormen that I work with. Can I list them? You know, can I tell some stories about them? So I thought, yeah, sure, I had to think. Got some stories for you. So the most famous guy that I worked with that was kind of a crazy doorman was actually Chris Eubank's brother. I used to work with him down at an R&B club in Brighton. His name was Simon, and I can say that because I'm not going to say anything terrible about the guy, and I legitimately did work with him. But he was a very eccentric dude, and in a different way to Chris. I think, you know, if you've seen Chris Eubank, he wears the sort of English gentry suits and walks around with a monocle and a cane and talks in a very kind of posh accent. Simon was a lot different to that. He used to run to work, so he would turn up in basically a pair of old shorts, a pair of like builder's boots that looked like they were just 15 years old or something, and a t-shirt, and he used to run like 10 miles to work in those boots, which were like hobnail boots basically, and he would run across the stones on the beach. And not many people realise, but Simon was actually a really good boxer, and both him and Chris were kind of looked at for boxing possibilities in their youth. It is said that Simon was technically maybe even better than Chris, but Chris had the kind of panaz and the showbiz stuff to go with it, so he was pushed forward maybe a bit more. He was definitely the more outgoing of the two. Simon was a very kind of quiet and reserved guy, so he may not have suited the glitzy lifestyle that the promoters want. He would like run across these stones, so even at the age he was then, he was incredibly fit. He was very muscular for his age, not an ounce of fat on him, but his attitude was super strange. So he used to turn up. I was actually running the club as the head doorman at the time, and he didn't give a damn like what anyone was doing, what anyone said. He would just go and do his own thing. So he would kind of mooch off downstairs, go into the club. And I remember one time the manager of the club coming up to me and he said, you know, I got a doorman down there and he's asleep on one of the tables. And I was like, asleep? What, you know, what do you mean? The tables are pretty small. I don't know how that's possible. And I went down there and he was literally just curled up on one of these fairly small tables in the club. And the club was pretty busy at the time. And he was literally just taking a nap. And I woke him up and I was like, dude, you know, we can't sleep at work. We got to get some stuff done. It's important to kind of keep your eyes open and stuff. And he was like, meh. He just didn't give a damn. He eventually drifted off and went and worked somewhere else. I enjoyed talking to him. He was quite religious, you know, he used to talk a lot about that kind of thing, and very laid back to talk to. But yeah, a very odd guy, and he certainly wasn't a guy that you could like get to work for you in any sort of easy manner, let's put it that way. He was kind of difficult to manage. There was a guy I worked with called Mike, and the first time I had met him, he was actually out of his head, and he had injured himself. You know, he had got drunk, he was on a night off, got super drunk, he had upset a load of his mates, and he turned up at the door, and he was in a bit of a mess. He thought he'd probably lost his door job, and he didn't really know what to do. I'd not met the guy before, but I sat down and chatted to him, and I said, look, I've got an opening here if you want to come along and work here, which he did. And he was actually a really sharp boxer himself. He was into his weightlifting and stuff, so we got friendly. You know, we used to go down the gym together, do a lot of training together, and he was in excellent shape. He was also a very good looking guy, so the girls were literally throwing themselves at this dude. You know, I wasn't blessed in that department, so I had to try really hard to chat girls up, and I wasn't really into kind of like getting significant numbers of girls on dates in clubs and stuff. I was more into just getting the work done, and then I would like look for a girl that I really liked, whereas a lot of the other doormen just wanted like as many different girls as possible. And Mike at the time was pretty happy to meet as many different girls as possible, and he didn't really have to do much to meet them, to be fair. They would just throw themselves at him. The problem with Mike is the more he trained in boxing, which he did a lot, the kind of quicker his hands got, and he was quite impulsive, and he had a little bit of a short temper. So if he had really quick hands and he was kind of used to throwing them about a bit, that was a problem. And we were constantly in situations where like someone would come over, try and start, and probably 9 times out of 10 maybe it could have been defused, but if you didn't catch it quick enough, they would have been knocked out within a couple of seconds, because Mike would have just decided, yeah, that, you know, now's the time. And legally speaking, he was probably within his rights, because these were violent people doing violent things towards us, and it was fair enough that you could have made a preemptive strike in those circumstances and classed it as legal, and it would have probably been found legal in court. Did you have to? You know, that's where the grey area is. I remember one time a guy came up and started on Mike, and I was saying to the guy, don't start on that dude, do not start on that dude, you know, I'm doing you a favour here, just walk away, mate, walk away. And the guy wouldn't listen, you know, he's like shoved Mike, gone to kick him or something like that, and Mike's like knocked him out in 2 punches. And I'm sort of thinking, oh my God. And to be fair, Mike often used to kind of grab these guys as they were falling over, because no one wanted anyone to hit their head on the floor. And he didn't really know what to do with this dude, because he was quite unconscious. So Mike took him across the road to a hotel opposite and just laid him out on the sofa, which was in the lobby, and left this guy sitting on the hotel sofa. And he looked like he was basically asleep there. There was no one else in the lobby at the time. And then he walked back over the road. And I'm like, why are you leaving him over there? And he said, boy, it's comfortable, you know, he'll wake up, he won't sort of know what's going on, and he'll just go away. And that used to happen a lot. Being knocked unconscious is a very, very strange thing. It's happened to me in sparring before. I've been knocked out, and it's really, really weird. But I've actually seen people get knocked out in pubs and clubs, and they don't have a clue what happened, you know, because it's basically brain damage. So a lot of the time it affects their ability to recall events just before. So I've actually had situations where people have come back up to the door team, and you think, oh no, they've come back for another fight, and they say, hey, help me, I've been knocked out and I don't know what happened, you know, someone's attacked me, and they can't remember that they started on you in the beginning, and it was actually one of the doormen that knocked them out. And they've come to you to ask what happened and for help, and they often get pretty pissed off when they find out what really happened. But that used to happen more often than not, you know, it was very, very common. We're stood over the road, we can see into the lobby of the hotel, and Mike's sort of looking a bit nervous because this guy wasn't moving very much. A woman then goes and sits in the lobby, she's obviously on the reception, and then this guy starts waking up. He stands up, and instead of kind of saying, oh, I don't know what's going on, he goes over to her and he starts trying to get over the counter to attack her, basically. And I've seen that in a few cases when people get knocked out, this sort of angry fight or flight situation kicks in. I'm guessing their adrenaline's going crazy and they're just still in like fight mode. And that's exactly what happened with this guy. So Mike's run over there again, run into the lobby to try and save this woman from getting beaten up, which was kind of his fault anyway, and grab this guy, and then once again the guy starts fighting with Mike, and I'm thinking, oh no, and then he gets knocked out again. So we then have to call an ambulance for the dude to get taken away, because we can't leave him obviously outside. And you know, this was back in the bad old days when all this stuff would happen all the time. It wasn't like it is now, where you have like people with clipboards and everyone's doing the right thing. There was no real set of guidelines for security staff to use back then. It was literally, if someone attacks you, you know, you fight them, you get the better of them, and then leave it at that, and however it ends up is how it ends up. He was a real handful to deal with, a lovely door guy. I used to get on famously with him. I remember loads of nights we had crazy situations with Mike. I remember one night I was in a really, really busy club, and there was actually a gang of dudes looking for this Mike. They wanted to beat him up over something. I think he'd thrown some drug dealers out. We always used to get that, you know, throwing drug dealers out. They would say, we're going to come and kill you. Sometimes they were kind of serious people that you should be a bit concerned about, most of the time not. But he was actually a little concerned that these guys were kind of semi-serious. So we were keeping an eye out, you know, making sure no one came into the club, and Mike was down there. We were making sure no one was going to fill him in. And he then disappeared from the club. We couldn't see him on the cameras, so we run downstairs, we're looking for him, and I can't see him anywhere. And I'm thinking, Jesus Christ, these guys must have lifted him from the club. So I go out the back door, which is sealed off. It's like a fire exit, and there's a alarm on it, and it wasn't supposed to be used. It had a bit of cable tie put across it. Kick the doors open, and there's something behind the doors, and then I hear this like muffled ouch. And behind the doors, Mike is standing there, and then there's a girl on her knees on the other side of the door, and I'm like, ah, okay, I see what's going on here. So that was a pretty regular occurrence for this guy. One of the most impressive doormen that I worked with was a guy called Andy. I actually met him originally down the gym. I was training down the gym. I was squatting decent weights. You know, I was squatting between 200 and 300 kilos, depending on which year it was and where I was in my training at the time, powerlifting. And a guy called Andy came in the gym. I'd not really met him before. He came up behind me, and he basically started cussing me out, you know, saying you're a fucking pussy for squatting like that, you know, you've got a few more in the tank, you should do more. And he was giving me motivation, but in like a very harsh way. So it worked, because obviously if you've got a guy standing behind you saying stop being a pussy, you know, you're going to make more of an effort. And then he helped me rack it and all that, and we got chatting. And I used to train with him after that fairly regular. Got on well with the guy. He looked like an absolute beast. I mean, he was very, very muscular, completely bald shaved head, covered in tattoo. He looked like someone you would definitely avoid on a dark night, let's put it that way. Very, very powerful guy. And his squatting was pretty decent. It wasn't phenomenal, but it was pretty damn decent. But it was clear that he knew a lot about, you know, squatting and various different exercise techniques, form factor and all that kind of thing. It then became apparent he was actually an ex-prison officer, and he had worked in like some quite serious prisons, some mufti units and all that. And as we were training, one time we're out the back getting changed, and then I looked down and he's like got one leg, and the other one is a false leg. It's like a metallic thing. And I was like, Jesus Christ, dude, you've got one leg. And it was from like, I don't know, he had like most of his thigh there, and then it was above the knee basically that he had this false leg on. And he was like, yeah, I lost my leg. And I got chatting to him, how did you lose your leg? Turned out when he was doing door work, so while he was a prison officer, he also did some door work afterwards just to make up his money. And he had really upset a group of chavs one night. One of them jumped in a car as he was fighting this group of them, and the guy in the car basically drove at him, ran him over, and his leg got hooked up under the wheel, and it took most of his leg off, or it was so badly damaged that it had to be amputated in the hospital. So that blew me away, that I'm like squatting, not thinking anything of it, and this dude's got one leg. So if anyone out there is saying, oh, I don't feel that great today, I'm not going to the gym, or you haven't ever been to the gym because you say, oh, my arms ache, or my back hurts a bit, I can't get down there. There's a guy with one fucking leg that can still get to the gym, and he didn't complain. I never even knew that he had that situation. I also found out later on from other people that when he had come out of hospital from his operation to have the leg removed and have this prosthetic fitted, that he had been offered all the kinds of help, you know, people that would come to his house and help him in the day. He'd refused literally all that help, and he had basically dragged himself around his house just by his arms, just pulling himself around on the floor and doing all his own, you know, making his own food, making his own drinks, putting himself to bed, dragging himself about. And he had refused any treatment because in his opinion there was like old and elderly people that would need the help more. So phenomenal dude, you know, very, very strong, incredibly strong in his mind. Now I found out more about him, and you know, as I got to know him and we worked together a bit and we trained a lot, and I got to know the more of his backstory. Then it turns out that he was also in the military, and he was actually in the Falklands War, and during that he was significantly injured and laid on the battlefield for about 2 hours with a very serious stomach injury that's been caused by some shrapnel. And it took him about 2 hours to get lifted out of that situation because the medics wouldn't come in and pull him out until it was safe to do so, because the whole area was like a firefight and whatever. Once they'd got him out, he nearly died on the way back in the ship. And he showed me, you know, he had significant injuries around the area that had obviously all healed up. But, you know, he was also suffering in that manner too, that he had all these sort of abdomen and stomach injuries that he'd never mentioned before. And a lot of this stuff I was picking up from other sources, and it was all verified as well. So unlike a lot of the bullshitters that you tend to meet on the door scene, you know, that say they're ex-SF and they're ex-this and they're bloody Jackie Chan's brother and whatever. This guy was a legit guy, you know, he had verified stories and he was who he said he was. Very, very impressive dude. And to be fair, a very fair guy as well. He wasn't a bully. He was very well spoken and pleasant to talk to. If people messed with him, he was not someone that you messed with. You know, he was a very serious guy, but he certainly didn't go looking for trouble, and if he could avoid it, he would. So to me, he was a great doorman. You know, he had the intimidation factor, he had the experience and the skill, and he had the kind of wise head on his shoulders that he just didn't want to break his knuckles for nothing. You know, he was only going to do that if he really had to, which is exactly the kind of door guys that I enjoyed working with. I used to work with another guy very occasionally. He generally worked in a different club to me, but his name was Dave. I got on really well with Dave, and he appeared like a mild-mannered kind of stationery salesman, and that was exactly what his day job was, which surprised me because he came across as a very, very sort of vanilla, nice guy, you know, the standard sort of normal job, normal family, sort of selling stationery by day, and then he was just making a bit of extra money at night. And you saw a few of these people on the door, right? They were having, you know, normal jobs. They needed a bit of extra money, so they weren't doing the door because they were like driven to the exciting aspect of it, or they fancied themselves as fighters or womanizers. They were drawn to it because they needed money, and that was one of the ways they could get money. And a lot of those guys concerned me slightly because a lot of them weren't capable of actually fulfilling the roles required. They didn't have an incredibly robust persona. They didn't have any sort of physical prowess. They weren't capable of dealing with seriously violent and confrontational situations. So a lot of them were what would be called jacket fillers, and you would kind of have them next to you on the door, and they would be like filling out the paperwork or whatever and making the teas. At first I'd thought maybe this guy was similar, but how wrong I was. You know, he was quite a big dude. He was like a rugby style physique, but very, very humble to speak to, very, very pleasant, and he just looked like a nice guy. But when it kicked off, he was an absolute beast. Like, I've never seen the change in someone so much. I remember one night I went into a club, and it was the club that he worked in. I knew all the door team. They just let me straight in because I used to pop in there for drinks after work. I go up to the bar. I'm wearing like a black security shirt, and I didn't even think about it, but they're all wearing exactly the same shirts, literally a black polo with white security lettering on the back. I'm having a drink, talking to the girl behind the bar. It's like 1 a.m, so probably about an hour and a half, 2 hours to go at this club, and I've literally gone in there half an hour just to calm down before I went home. Because when you finish a shift, if it's kind of high adrenaline stuff, it's impossible to just go home. Everyone thinks, oh, you must be tired, you're going to go straight home and go to bed. It's impossible. You get home and you're like sat there for an hour and a half with your brain going at 100 miles an hour. So no matter how physically tired you felt actually standing up doing your shift, by the time you got back you were not able to sleep. So I generally used to go somewhere else. Sometimes I'd have a beer, sometimes I'd have a couple of cold drinks, you know, a couple of lemonades or whatever. I'd never go and get drunk because obviously I had to drive home, but normally speaking I just want to chat to the other guys and kind of relax a bit. So this night, chatting to the bar girl, I get a tap on the shoulder and then I just get punched straight in the face. And it's at that point I realise, as I'm sort of turning round and I've been like punched in the mouth, that there's like half the club is having a fight. So I immediately start trying to deal with the guy who's punched me. I'm now fighting with him, and all the other doormen are fighting. This eventually gets moved outside. We're dragging these guys outside in the midst of like a fist fight basically. So there's unconscious guys on the floor, there's doormen getting injured, and the whole club's freaking out. We eventually grab a load of these guys, we're dragging them all outside. The owner of the club, in his infinite wisdom, decides the best thing to do is going to be to shut the doors. So he shuts the doors. Now there's like 5 of us out there with a lot of dudes, and they've also got a few of their mates out there. So not only have we got injured guys who are now getting up angrily off the floor and want to kill us, but they've also met up with some of their friends outside who they're also urging should kill us too. And I'm with this guy, Dave, the mild-mannered stationery salesman. The manager opens the door at this point and shouts everyone back in the club a lot of the doormen did run back in the club, and I think it was just me and Dave left, and I'm thinking, oh my god, there's like 20 dudes now getting up, you know, and between them the sort of ones that hadn't been attacked that were waiting outside and the ones that were getting up off the floor significantly outnumber us. And Dave, you know, bless him, he was bang up for it, and he just goes up and immediately challenges them all, says like, bring it on. Now some of these guys had been pretty badly hurt, so they're now thinking, you know, this guy is an absolute nutter, and they're kind of re-evaluating their life choices at that point. I'm stood with Dave and pretty much the same attitude of like, we're locked outside, there's nothing we can really do about it. If we make it's a bit like being surrounded by animals. You know, if we'd have made a bolt for the door, excuse the pun, but if we'd have run towards the door, then they would have just kicked the shit out of us from the back, because we've showed that weakness, and they're like, oh, they're scared. We're, you know, gonna swarm on them like a pack of hyenas. And that's really scary to me, because that's when you get people get killed, when there's like 20 guys all kicking someone on the floor. They all kick him a couple of times, but then you've been kicked in the head like 40, 50 times, you could die. You know, that's a very, very serious situation to get in. So you do not want to be showing signs of weakness at that point. Also bear in mind, you know, I was 100+ kilos at the time. This guy Dave was a rugby physique, probably around the same weight. Neither of us are going to win any running races, right? Now these days I advocate that people actually do plenty of cardio, because cardio is the #1 way that you're going to get away from people if you're confronted on the street. But if you weigh 100 kilos and you spend a lot of time powerlifting, you're not going to beat anyone in a running race for any long periods of time, and we would have just been run down, and again we would have had the shit kicked out of us. And if you're run down, the worst part of that is you've now lost your greatest benefit, because our greatest benefit was that we were much stronger than any of these other guys. We were a lot bigger, we looked physically intimidating. If we then run half a mile, we look like out of breath, bedraggled pair of guys, and they're probably going to be still breathing pretty easy, because they were pretty thin and wiry dudes. So that's the last thing you want to be doing. Luckily for us, I think one of them stepped forward, Dave clumped him, he went down on the floor. The others re-evaluated choices, sort of got together, and they did the usual jeering. They've picked their mate up. They're saying they're going to come back and kill us. As soon as they start saying we're going to come back and kill you, you know that the situation is nicely dealt with, because if they're in front of you, why would they tell you they have to come back? They would obviously do it there and then if they actually meant what they were talking about. So we got out of that one. You know, we kind of walked back to the club as they were walking off down the road, hammered on the door, and then we gave the manager a piece of our minds, because he was an absolute knob for locking us out there in the first place. But yeah, that dude was a solid dude, and that wasn't what I expected at the time when I met him. The last guy I mentioned, I've talked about him in a couple of videos before, was a guy called Big Lee. He was basically the shape of a giant rugby ball, and he was pretty much, I say self-absorbed. He wasn't like self-absorbed like, oh, he thought he was really good looking or anything. He was self-absorbed, like he would only do things that benefited him, and he had the sort of efficiency of like a sloth, in terms of he would only move if it benefited him, and he would move in the most like efficient way possible to save as much energy as he could. So I mean, he was obsessed with women, so if there was like a pretty lady over the other side of the club, he would make his way over there. But if you called him to the other side of the club to do something, you know, forget it, he wasn't going to come. You would have to engineer a situation whereby either there was a fight or a pretty lady to actually get him to that area. That basically summed up his entire life, but he was kind of hilarious because he was very, very big, and he had quite a low centre of gravity, so he was kind of like the Titanic. You know, he was just this big sort of slow moving ship that used to go through the club. And when there were fights, he wasn't like a super handy guy like punching. He just used to sort of be so much bigger and so much more robust than other people that he would just dominate them with his size. He would sort of grab them with his fairly short arms and just kind of wrap them up, and once they were kind of in this like 25 stones worth of wrap, and he was also phenomenally strong, I might add. I mean, he used to bench probably 200+ kilos with relative ease. So that is a pretty strong dude. And if you imagine getting grabbed by someone that is regularly benching 200 key, which is well over 400 pounds, and they weigh like twice as much as an average person, then, you know, it was quite an effective way to do door work. It was actually a very good thing because it stopped a lot of the potential damage and violence that would occur. You know, really the last thing you want on the door is people that are shit at boxing and kickboxing, because it makes a mess. You know, the fights are messy, they're not choreographed like in the films where people get like clipped on the chin and they nicely fall over and everything's over. There's always blood sprayed everywhere. Even the knuckles of the striking person get cut to hell on people's teeth and stuff, so there's blood spraying up the wall from them. There's blood all over people's shirts. There's blood on the floor where people have been knocked out. You know, the art of striking, yes, it's potentially quite successful, but in terms of the commercial value to a nightclub, it makes the place look terrible, because potential customers are going to come in, see blood splattered all up the entranceway, or see like a massive fist fight going on, and no matter how effective you are, you might knock a load of the punters out that are being violent and attacking you, but it still looks atrocious to anyone of any sensibility that's walking into that venue. So they would much rather see a very big man just sort of bear hugging someone and just carrying them out. And I mean, sometimes Lee would just grab the sort of backs of people's pants, you know, and belts, and he would literally be carrying 2 or 3 guys out, and the guys would be like flailing away with their arms and legs in a comedy fashion, and he would just very slowly walk out the door with them. I never ever saw him get at all animated. You know, he wasn't stressed. I don't think he knew what stress was. He was just at his own speed, and he wouldn't mind me saying that, because he actually admitted to me that he lives his life like that. You know, he specifically lived his life like by his own set of rules that were simply to benefit himself. If he did anything for anyone else, it was because it had some sort of direct benefit for him. That's the sort of set of rules and regulations that he had set for himself. Respect, because he admitted that. You know, I've got a lot more time for someone who's straight down the line and admits things like that to me than someone who pretends they're doing all this work for charity and actually they're a complete arsehole. So yeah, like, you know, I've even worked with people that have straight up admitted to me and said, I'm racist, or I'm homophobic, or I hate these type of people, or whatever it was. I've got more respect for someone who actually tells me that than someone who harbours those thoughts internally and pretends like they're not, but actually they're a really unpleasant person deep down. There always has to be some element of respect for someone who's prepared to stand up for their principles, even if I don't like those principles and I don't agree with those principles. But the fact that they're prepared to admit that is their principles and then stand on them, I've got respect for that. And I can respect parts of someone's personality without having to dislike the whole. You know, I might not like a part of someone's ethos and their philosophy and their thoughts, but that doesn't necessarily mean I have to write them off totally. And after a while, I've even managed to win some people around. You know, that we've discussed some of these matters where there might be something about me they didn't like, or something about them that I didn't like that I thought was incorrect. And if you spend enough time having open discussions about these things, you can come to change your mind. So if you just write people off and say, oh, that guy I think harbours racist ideas, you know, he said he didn't like Indians or whatever he said, I'm never speaking to him again, you've then lost the chance to ever turn that around, you know. And I lost count of the times that I met people that said that they were racist, and then I introduced them to lots of my friends from all different ethnicities. I told them about some of the stories I have with, you know, travel stories and stuff like that. And they started to change their minds slowly, and they would admit, yeah, maybe I've made some judgments that were incorrect, that were based on things I'd seen in the media instead of actual life experiences. So it's always worth bearing that in mind. Don't just write people off because you don't agree with something that they think or something that they've said. I hope that was of some use and some amusement to you. I knew loads and loads of door guys. Those were the ones who kind of stood out that I could remember well enough to relay. There were some other stories that were so gross that I probably can't even share them on YouTube. Maybe I will one day on another platform or something. Thank you for watching. Take care. Like and subscribe. Catch you next time.